Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Melissa Durtschi with Navigating Education. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar today. Our mission here at Navigating Education is to empower families and students with knowledge so that they can choose their educational journey and path. Today, I have with me the amazing Sarah Markel, and she is one of our academic clinicians here in our office. One of the major ways that we like to help students and families are two different ways: evaluations for learning disabilities, and then also consultative services for things like school meetings, IEPs, 504s, things like that. Honestly, this has been a personal journey and a professional journey for me. My own daughter, we had a journey trying to help get her helps and supports in the school system. And so my journey, both professionally and personally, led to Navigating Education. And I'm so excited to share this time with Sarah. Sarah's going to be joining us today to talk about the IEP process. And how I know Sarah, she works here at Navigating Education. She's a special education teacher, and she's going to tell you more about herself. Today, before I turn the time over to Sarah, there's a couple of housekeeping things that I'd like to talk about. Any handouts that we talk about today in today's webinar will be available right underneath our YouTube channel, so you can join us there. Right underneath all of the handouts, links, things like that that are spoken of will be right there for you. Also, please, if you want to continue any of the conversations, we're on social media platforms, Navigating EDU or Navigating Education. So join us there. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and any of the new ones that come out. Sarah, I'm going to turn the time over to you, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. And then also, I'm really excited for you to talk to us today about the IEP process, because I know that lots of people have questions about what is this IEP process and what are the frequently asked questions and supports and resources. So thanks so much for joining us today, Sarah. And we'll turn the time over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Durtschi. I look forward to addressing some of the frequently asked questions that are sometimes asked about the IEP process. Just a little bit about myself. I've been teaching special education for 13 years. I have my master's from the University of Northern Colorado as a special education generalist for ages 5 to 21. I plan on pursuing my endorsement for early childhood special education for ages 0 to 8 years old next fall. I have a 9-year-old daughter named Charlotte. She loves to read, and she's been my continuing inspiration for wanting to stay in education in this particular field, especially advocating for families and parents. As you know, when I joined Navigating Education here as a teammate, I just would love to continue to support families to overcome some of those educational barriers that I know families do encounter. So yeah, let's just go ahead and hop to it. And I'll go ahead and get going on some of those frequently asked questions that families sometimes do ask. Today I'm gonna just go ahead and start out by answering what special education is and who are some of the stakeholders. But it is important to address the fact that we're going to go through these frequently asked questions, and that's our objective today. Okay, so first I'm going to start out by answering the question, what is special education? And again, those stakeholders are crucial to this entire process, so keep that in the back of your head as we go through each of these questions. Special education is a program of specialized services for students with disabilities. Students who qualify for special education services are protected under IDEA by the federal government to a free, appropriate public education. Many of the stakeholders involved in the process are not only just members of the school faculty, but they include other members of the family that could be extended family or anybody that plays a significant role in that student's life. It may be surprising for some people to learn that at the start of a possible referral for an IEP, The school team members or family members of that student will often point out a concern in an area that they're seeing an academic impact. It can either be behaviorally or academically. Typically, those are the two main areas that will be pinpointed by someone either as a general education teacher, a family member or legal guardian, or somebody in administration. If the concern cannot be resolved with classroom interventions or even a behavior plan, this will lead to students being referred to the MTSS process, where members of the team will collaborate together with the students' guardians and communicate different and more intense different types of interventions, often called tier 2 interventions, that are definitely a lot more intense, that are usually implemented for 6 to 8 weeks. After that intervention is implemented for 6 to 8 weeks, the MTSS team will gather again, bring in their evidence and data that was collected over those last few weeks, and go ahead and figure out what's working and what's not working. If they feel there hasn't been enough progress made, oftentimes they will brainstorm again to implement a different type of intervention, either behaviorally or academically, and they will go ahead and try to implement that for another 6 to 8 weeks. Often or not, the MTSS team will review student records, including attendance, the students' grades, their health, their vision and hearing screenings, the family's background as well, which will usually be conducted with interviews. And then they look at the student's school, also like their academic achievements and school rewards as well, just to kind of get a full picture of where that student is academically. After a student's progress has been tracked with the MTSS team and the family has been notified of the student's progress or lack thereof, a referral to the IEP team may be made. And it can be initiated by any of the stakeholders, including a general education teacher, family member again, or even administration. Sometimes I've seen doctors even make recommendations to families to go ahead and get a formal assessment as well. Once the student is referred to the IEP team and the family signs permission for formal testing to begin, the family is typically provided with a copy of what is called procedural safeguards, which indicates the legal guardian's rights as well as the student's rights. There is a timeline of 60 calendar days to complete the formal and informal evaluation in that area of concern, either academically or behaviorally. Those who conduct the formal testing may include people such as speech pathologists, occupational therapists, school psychologists, or even special education teachers. Sometimes even a stakeholder will request a special education evaluation independently outside of the MTSS process, which can be typically honored by a school. But it still follows that exact same timeline for the process to begin once permission has been signed by the guardians. And that's kind of how you know that the process has begun. These are the possible areas of a suspected disability that the IEP team can possibly evaluate for. It just depends upon which areas of concern the student has been referred for. In the referral, the permission will indicate all areas the student will be evaluated for. So it doesn't necessarily always going to be maybe academically, but it could include academics and speech, things like that, or an emotional concern. So the social worker may be involved, the school psychologist, but it will be indicated on that referral once it's given to the family or legal guardian to go ahead and sign that permission. The legal guardians can request the evaluations to be stopped at any point in time during the initial evaluation. If a legal guardian disagrees with any of the formal assessments being administered, the legal guardian or family members can request an independent education evaluation outside of the school. Once the evaluation process is complete, an initial IEP meeting is set up with all of the stakeholders and legal guardians to make a determination of eligibility based upon the Colorado Department of Education guidelines for that particular disability. Sometimes families may be concerned with the label given if the student qualifies for a disability, but it's important just to remember that an IEP provides students access to the general education curriculum. It also tracks their independent goals and how much time they spend with a service provider, and it also provides accommodations to ensure student success. Just to summarize, the IEP process, first and foremost, begins with the stakeholders and then moves forward to the MTSS team often. Then it's moved to the IEP team if the student has not made enough progress and in that particular area of concern, either behaviorally or academically. Again, a referral can be made by any stakeholder, but permission is needed, and that's the signal that the evaluation process has begun. Once the initial IEP meeting is held, the IEP team determines if the student qualifies. Annual meetings are then held if they do qualify to go over the student's IEP goals, as well as accommodations, how that student is making progress in those certain academic areas or behaviorally as well. After 3 years, a reevaluation is held where the student will be evaluated for continuing services once permission is again obtained, but that happens again only every 3 years, and it still needs to be ensured that it's held up to those eligibility requirements held by CDE. I hope that kind of helps in a way with answering some of those frequently asked questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing those frequently asked questions. I know many of our viewers probably have similar questions to ones that we get here in the office. So what I'd like to do from kind of this point on is kind of open up discussion. I will talk about it. Please, put in your experience with it too. But some of the frequent questions that come into our office that I'm talking with families a lot about, you touched on the MTSS process. And many times I'll talk with families where they're wondering, well, my child has been in MTSS, but they've done a couple of rounds of the MTSS that they've referred to it as. And they're like, they'll make progress, but they're not sure. And so we'll go through the process again. And so the question that always comes to me is when is the school needing to move forward with a special education evaluation? And usually the conversation kind of goes towards hearing the background because it's going to be dependent on every single student. That's a great place to start is MTSS. And there is part of IDEA law that talks about MTSS not being used to delay the process. Now, if it hasn't been used at all, then, and I'm pretty sure that because I brought it up again, MTSS is just an acronym for our viewers of multi-tiered system of support. I'm pretty sure that Sarah had mentioned that before, but it's a way of collecting that data. But when I'm talking with families, it's this cloudy area of, well, when do we move it towards, I can see that my child still needs help and I'm asking for help and they're trying to understand the process, right? And so there's this area of IDEA that talks about not using MTSS to delay the special education process. Now, if it's the first time that they're going through it, then that's not a delay. And it also makes a big difference if the child is making progress through MTSS and then you're reevaluating for a totally different skill. If we're looking at reading through an MTSS process versus a writing or things like that, or behavioral. So it's dependent on every single child, but also there is this piece of, is it delaying the process? Is there anything else that you want to add to that, Sarah?
I think that it's just important to, and I think we've spoken to this before, maybe in just our own personal conversations, just that, yeah, that over-identification piece, it does happen. And so I think sometimes general education teachers and special education teachers, any service providers are often sometimes just want to be a little bit weary of making sure that they're not trying to over-identify anybody unnecessarily. So the MTSS process, I can see where it can kind of get muddy though, oftentimes in schools where they either don't collect enough data or somehow there's maybe possibly a substitute or some long-term sub, something like that. Something falls through the cracks easily and then they have to reboot it. So again, there's lots of variables. So I think it does depend upon each situation, but it should not definitely hinder any student's access to maybe a possible referral if it's needed. I think
Absolutely.
to make sure that the school is staying on top of collecting that data and that making sure that the families are included in that process. Sometimes families just simply aren't even aware that their student is in maybe an MTSS or intervention group or something like that. So collecting that data for that 6 to 8 weeks and kind of having that in the parent or family guardian's background too, and just making sure, okay, it's been about 6 to 8 weeks. Should I check in with the school and see when the next meeting might be happening so we can kind of see where my student's at. But that's something to ask of families as well, but just to kind of hopefully give everybody some sense of that there should be a timeline there and it shouldn't just be stuck in MTSS land forever.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Sarah, about the purpose of the MTSS process, that it is to help alleviate the over-identification. I love that you brought that up because you're absolutely right. Sometimes it depends on what data we're starting with, right? Because if we have kind of a concern, but we don't have empirical data or we don't have normative data, that's going to be like state testing or something concrete. It's a quantitative out of 100 kids where they're at. If we don't have that information quite yet, MTSS is a great place to kind of start to gather some of those data pieces, right? And so that's something that we help with here at Navigating Education, is getting those pieces of data. Where are we at? Is it that they're at a 50th, which would be right in average, typical for their age group? Are they at a 50th percentile, or are they more at like a 10th percentile? And yes, we need to move quicker than an MTSS process. Those are types of things that we can help with here, because you're absolutely right. The MTSS process, the purpose behind it is to gather that information all together into one location. And when it's used for that purpose, I think it's a really valuable tool to help with not over-identifying students for special education, because sometimes they just need that intervention, and sometimes they need more than that.
Exactly. And again, those stakeholders are the most important people. They know that
Yeah.
student better than anyone, than any teacher or person in administration.
Yeah.
So ensuring that things do happen in a timely fashion, because it can. I mean, 6 to 8 weeks and then another intervention for another 60 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. It's maybe not a great fit for every single student in every situation.
Yeah, and I would also add to that if you do start to feel like you're in a loop, if I'm talking to the parents here, like if you do feel like you're stuck in that loop, you can ask at that MTSS meeting, instead of going through another process, instead of going through another MTSS, I'd like to talk about moving forward into referral into special education. So you can have that conversation. But if there's been no MTSS, if there's been, like, it depends on your starting point, I think. And if you need help with identifying where that starting point is, we can help with that. Is MTSS, because it is a great program to go through depending on where you're at in the process. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing about that. Another question that I wrote down as you were sharing your information was around the referral process and a parent referral, and that all stakeholders that are involved with the child can make that referral. I want to kind of gear in towards the parent referral, because that's a lot of questions that I get when I'm talking with families here in the office is, well, if I've given a referral, if I've referred my student, if I've written in writing, if I've written in writing, I've asked for a special education evaluation, does the school have to move forward with that? And so that's the biggest question that I have, is if I've referred them, does the school automatically have to move forward? And it's not an easy, straightforward answer. I think, Sarah, you might agree with that. Like, yes, we're moving forward with it. It depends. I'm going to go back to what we had discussed before. It depends on where we're at in the process. if we are at, there's maybe home is seeing more concerns than school is, then we've got to collect data to know what's going on and bring some data to the table in an MTSS format. So what would happen first is a referral meeting and determine at that point, do we need to refer at this time for a special education evaluation, or is it more appropriate to, let's have you go through the MTSS process, collect information, do some screenings, things like that, just to talk about the parents' concerns, to gather the information needed to make that determination. And so the referral process with the parent perspective is, if I've asked for a special education evaluation, do they have to move forward? The answer is yes, into a referral meeting. And then that's where the discussion happens on, you can bring forward your information, you can share your information, maybe you have outside evaluation you can bring to the table, and this is why we're asking for us to move forward. And then a conversation happens there. Do we move forward? Do we not move forward? Anything else that you'd like to add to that, Sarah?
No, I don't think so. I think you spoke to that clearly, that yes, the referral needs to be taken seriously by families and by the team, and just to make sure that whatever evidence and data that the family would like to bring is heard and shared, because sometimes it can be easy for that to be overlooked or maybe not taken as seriously. So it's important for the families to know that they do have a large say in what's going on with their students' education. And
that's a great point. And I would say, to extend on what you had shared, it needs to be a formalized meeting at the school. It's not just an email coming back, like, excuse me. Let's say that I sent an email to my school representative, the special education teacher, or you might want to start with your general education teacher and just ask for the process. Let's say that I've sent an email to my child's general education teacher, and I've said, we'd like, our family would like to move forward with a special education evaluation. Please give us more information. It can't be that it's just, well, that's not what we're doing at this time. That's not how the process would work. It would need to be a formalized meeting. They may need to send the information on, let me refer you over to the special education person, or let me hand you off to the next person in that process. Let me get you more information about that. That would be very, very appropriate. And that referral meeting, so it needs to be a referral meeting where you bring your information, school brings their information, and you have a conversation about why you want to refer for. Sometimes it could be, yeah, let's go ahead, let's move forward. And it kind of bypasses the referral meeting because they're seeing stuff at school too. Sometimes that referral meeting is really necessary to kind of get everybody on that same page and a way to move forward with it. The last question that I have that comes up a lot is, I have a lot of families ask, what do I do if I don't agree? And you had mentioned about the IEE, the independent educational evaluation outside of the school, that those are in the procedural safeguards. I wondered if we could talk more about, sometimes people don't know what the procedural safeguards are. It's going to be a packet of papers that is given to a family. You can also look it up online for IEP procedural safeguards. And in there's a whole section on, because again, it's going to come back to specifically at what point in the process are you at on what the next steps are. But that booklet has some, if I don't agree with what the school is doing for the IEP, or I don't agree with the eligibility, or I don't agree with the process that's happening, it's all outlined in that packet, and you can access that directly online. It's just looking up IEP procedural safeguards, and it's readily available online. Anything else that you'd like to share, Sarah, on any of those?
I don't think so. I think that it's just important, again, for families to know that they have rights throughout this entire process. And if they don't agree with something that's going on within the school, that they need to be prepared for that and know what steps they need to take. So it's I'm glad that you mentioned again, the procedural safeguards are crucial for families. Yes.
Yeah, and right before, I'm going to share the resource guide that we have for our viewers that they can download and use for more information about IEPs. I totally lost my train of thought. That's hilarious. I was listening so intently on what you were saying, Sarah. Basically, that it's because I always worried when my family was going through the process. It's different as a parent compared to when you're more of an advocacy role. And when I was a parent perspective, it can get overwhelming. And you can invite people to those meetings, and it's to have a conversation and to remember that everyone at that table, we might have different ways of approaching it, but everyone at the table does want that student to succeed. So let me share my screen, and we'll pull up Sarah's information and resources. So we're giving here some information about recommended organizations and websites to look into, and also recommended books if you want to read more about the IEP process and dive deep. I always like to leave people with more information so that you can learn more about it. We will also do deeper dives on our YouTube channel for different parts of the IEP process and different parts of IDEA. So join us there too. So this will be available, like I said, at the bottom of the YouTube, and you can join us there. And also, and my other screen went totally dead. So I just also wanted to encourage you again to join us on any of our social media platforms and continue the conversations there. And if there's anything that you would like to know in particular and have Sarah and I address, for me to hop back on or put a short video on specific questions, please leave us comments, and we'd love to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today, and we're very lucky to have you as an asset here at Navigating Education. Thank you.